Minister, Mr. Nandi, UN Resident Representative, Excellencies, Dr. Kalagala, ladies and gentlemen. Let me thank first and foremost the UNDP for inviting me to make this presentation today. It is as to repeat what the Minister said, the UN reports are always excellent, always ahead of their time, and I am delighted to be here to comment on this particular report. So I have been asked to talk on equity aspects in relation to Sri Lanka. That is who I am, that's where I work, and these are the hats I wear where I work, and I'm particularly as program coordinator of the Master of Development Practice, which is Sustainable Development Practice program, which the UNDP has been supporting us with. I am particularly pleased to be here. I'd like to record my appreciation for the motivation behind this report, why sustainability and equity. I'll then talk about equity aspects and Sri Lanka's record, and then I'll touch on some challenges for the future in Sri Lanka. Why sustainability and equity? Actually, talking in terms of the Human Development Report and being ahead of its time, the motivation, the background, the rationale for sustainability and equity was spelled out in a background paper to the Human Development Report of 1995. And if you remember what the Human Development Report of 1995 was, that was on gender equity. And that was also way ahead of its time. The first World Development Report on gender came out this year. 15 years ago, 16 years ago, the UN was there first. So the principle that underlies this is the principle of universalism, that you extend the same concern for all human beings, irrespective of race, class, gender, nationality, or generation. And in this paper, Anand and Sen made the statement that there would, however, be something distinctly odd if we were deeply concerned for the well-being of the future and as it unborn generations, while ignoring the plight of the poor today. And I think this report sets that right. And so we have a new definition as well, replacing the Brundtland Commission definition that we are all familiar with a definition that focuses on expanding the substantive freedoms. I think people today mentioned the word choices of people today, while making reasonable efforts to avoid seriously compromising those of future generations. Now, under equity aspects, I'd like to talk in terms of three areas. Equity in relation to contributions to global threats, equity in relation to environmental deprivations, and equity in terms of vulnerability to local impacts. If you look at what the report says in terms of contributions to global threats, between countries' disparities in contribution to environmental deterioration is very high. So carbon dioxide emissions of very high HDI countries are 4 times as much as high and medium HDI countries, and 30 times as much as low HDI countries. So while the poorest are the worst hit, they are also the least contributors. The average UK citizen accounts for as much greenhouse gas emissions in 2 months as a person in a low HDI country generates in a year. And the average Qatari does the same in 10 days. Now, we don't have information for within country disparities. But if you look at what the report says about between country comparisons and the basis for it, it attributes this to lifestyle disparities. More energy intensive activities, driving cars, cooling and heating homes and businesses, consuming processed and packaged food. And if you think about all of us in this room today, I would suspect that I would definitely say we are in the top decile of income earners in Sri Lanka. I would even go as far as to say that we are in the top 3% of Sri Lankans. And I suspect that most of us arrived here in an air-conditioned vehicle. I did. And most of us work in an air-conditioned office. And in terms of our lifestyle, we probably have a washing machine. We probably have many of the things that the average UK citizen or the average Qatari do. So the reason I'm pointing this out is simply to show, in a way, how difficult the task of expecting people to cut back their lifestyles to think of future generations. And to point out that if we were to sit and work out the disparities within countries, depending on the unit we choose, that we might find certainly that among the top 3% of Sri Lankans contribute to between 4 and 30 times those of the average villager in, for example, Siembalandur. Okay, let's move to disparities in environmental deprivations. If you look at access to an improved drinking water source, as was pointed out earlier, Sri Lanka is doing well. We have achieved the MDG target. We achieved it in 2006-07. But there is variation in access across sectors. And we find that if you take the estate sector has not achieved the national target. Yeah? So less than 60% in the estate sector. If you take districts and provinces, we find that the north and the east has been doing well, Colombo has been doing well, but central, Uva and Sabaragamuwa provinces and all the districts at the district level within these provinces have less than 80% access. Polonnaruwa district has less than 80% access, and less than 50% of the households in Nuwara, which is a predominantly estate area, do not have access to an improved drinking water source. And this is a study that was done by the IPS with support from the UNDP and in collaboration with the National Council for Economic Development. What about distance to water source? So not just access, but distance. In the urban sector, there is almost universal existence of a water source within the compound or very close to the compound. In the rural sector, you find 8% of households must travel more than 200 meters from their residence to a water source. And over 10% of households in the estate sector have to travel more than 1 kilometer to fetch water for their bare necessities. If you also think of the topography of the estate sector, you are walking more than 1 kilometer in hilly terrain, carrying these buckets of water to your house. And when we talk in terms of equity, there's what Americans would call a double whammy here. It's not just the poor, but it's also the poor and the female who are affected by this, because typically carrying water and we will see later collecting firewood are almost universally female activities. If you look at sustainable access to improved sanitation, we are doing well. Again, we've achieved the MDG target by 2006-07. The reason I have Sri Lanka in quotes there is because in 2006-07, I think we were not able to do all of the north and east. So Batticaloa is included, but if I remember right, none of the other districts in the north and east are included in this survey. And we have variation again. So a separate survey that was done in the north and east in 2004 shows that access is only 66.5%. We see that although the average is 93%, it could vary from 98% in Galle to 82% in Batticaloa. Sectorally, again, we see that the estate sector is somewhat far behind. We see 11% of households in the eastern province and 13% of households in the estate sector have no latrine facilities at all. This is again from the same IPS report. What about disparities in energy deprivations? We find that 80% of households in Sri Lanka do not use modern forms of energy. Most households use firewood, and again there's a variation across sectors with